CAR, as we called it then, before it had the French after title, Canadian Artist Representation was really Jack Chambers' baby. There were, well, I don't know how many now, maybe 40 or 50 Canadian artists that were alive that were written a letter by the National Gallery saying to the effect, "Dear blank, we want to reproduce your painting blank in 300 Years of Canadian Art," which had been a 1967 show. This was 1968. "If we don't hear from you within 2 weeks, we'll assume you've acquiesced. Yours sincerely." And so Jack said, "Well, wait a minute now. I think we should, let's talk about this." And I think what happened when we got 6 people, whether I think Tak Tanabe and I are the only ones that are still alive. There's Ken Lockheed and Yves Gaucher and Jack and Bob Downing. And there may have been somebody else, but we're enough to fit into a hotel room. I think what happened when we said, "Wait a minute, we want to talk," I think someone at the National Curator at the National Gallery said, "Oh, look at these guys. Let's look at our legal boys." And the legal boys said, "What? The letters weren't registered. And of course, even back then, copyright could only be transferred in writing, and nobody had transferred it. So they were very nice, and they invited us up. And that was the beginning of it. And I would have to say during our 2 or 3 years, Jack really was the godfather. I was the consigliere. He would call me up, "Do you think such and such will work? Do you think it won't?" And then, of course, Jack got ill, and as he became less able to go places, Kim Ondaatje was very good, and good with Jack as well, too. But Kim and I, for example, had to go out to the West Coast because Jack couldn't make it. He just wasn't really well enough. And gradually it became, in the beginning, it was run from London to different cities across Canada. And then shortly afterwards, it turned into provincial chapters. And at that point, John Boyle and Greg Curnow joined up. In the beginning, it was Jack's thing, but after Greg saw that it was a worthy organization, he joined in. And John Boyle, who was absolutely marvelous, it was John that said, apropos of all these things, he said, "Well, if it's free, it can't be worth much." And this was right on, especially in our society. I think the rental fees must have been Jack's idea. I don't remember. Certainly, I'm not sure whether John was involved that early, but we all thought about it that way. And so we called another meeting, and this time there was about 5 or 6 members of CAMDO there, Canadian Art Directors Organization, isn't it? And they said, well, everybody said, well, this is a really great idea, but we don't have any money. We just don't have any money for it. So I said to, I think it was the Montreal Museum director, I said, "How many shows, contemporary shows, do you do a year?" He said, "Well, about 20. He said, "Our budget is, we have, I don't know, $10,000 a show or something like that." I said, "Well, why don't you do 19 and use the 20th budget to pay the other artists?" Well, I may have made a rude noise. There's a silence around the table. Nobody wanted to say, "Hey, that's a good idea," and really nothing happened. And the next thing that we did have to do a fee schedule, and we wanted galleries to help us, because I realized, having run the Macintosh Gallery for 4 years in the early 60s, that small galleries have very little budget. In fact, I don't even remember I know our acquisition budget at the Macintosh was $200 a year, for which we bought drawings, because you could get drawings for $25, $50. Except for the Colville, it was $200 that year. So anyways, but nobody would help us with that, so we just had to go out with a flat fee, which wasn't really fair for the little galleries, and it was too much for the little galleries, and probably not enough for the big places. And then there was a great deal of resistance to it. And I think really what happened was that the Canada Council started giving money on the condition that there was rental fees. And I'm not sure that every gallery still pays rental fees, but it's more of an accepted thing across Canada now. And as far as I'm concerned, this was the most valuable part of it. And I know one day Jack called me up, and he was fairly sick by that time, and he said, "Do you think the rental fees are worth it? Maybe we should just go with postcards or whatever." And I said, "No, absolutely not, because hardly anybody gets a postcard made, and you won't make much money from a postcard anyway. But everybody will benefit from rental fees, and I think pretty well everybody has, and even smaller galleries pay if they can. If the artist-run centers will pay. So, you know, if it's free, it can't be worth much. And if you're paying for it, maybe there's something to it."